Hey guys, what's up? Nick here once again, and welcome to my most controversial video of all time. Today, we are going to be ranking from worst to best every Twisted Metal game in the entire series. So let's get right into it. Normally I have this disclaimer at the end of my tier list videos, and this is not technically a tier list because I'm not making it on tierlist.com. This is straight up just going to be listing all the way from the worst game in the series to the best game in the series, in my personal opinion. But the disclaimer is that obviously this is my opinion. I'm not saying this is fact, and you do not have to agree with me. If you don't agree with me, that is 100% fine. But all I ask of you is if you disagree, or even if you agree, please let me know your personal tier list from the worst game in the series all the way up to the best game in the series, in your opinion, in the comment section below. Because I love to have these discussions. That's the whole reason for creating the Twisted Metal Federation Discord, is for everybody in the Twisted Metal fandom to share their differing opinions, because there is a lot to go through in these games, and there is a lot of differing opinions for many good reasons. But I just want to give you mine, and that's the reason for this video. I also wanted to state that when it comes to Twisted Metal head-on, I am going to technically be mushing the PSP version and the Extra Twisted Edition on PS2 together in my ranking here. They're not going to be ranked as separate video games. So starting out at number 8, the worst of the worst in my personal opinion. And already off the gate, we're going to get some people hating on my video, and I totally understand why, but it is the OG Twisted Metal 1. Yes, I know this is kind of sacrilege to be putting this at the bottom of the list, but hear me out. The main reason I do not prefer this game over any of the other ones in the series is for essentially two main reasons. The first main reason, this game just feels unfinished in so many ways. We have the text scrolling endings, which are just don't feel satisfying in the slightest. You go through all of the pain of the tournament to get to the ending of each character in the game. It's the same as every other game in the series, in which you pick a character, they have a wish, and they go through the tournament in order to get their one wish granted by Calypso, who is running the contest, and apparently he has mystical powers. But this was the first game in the series, so nobody knew what the story was about until you completed the game and you got this endless scrolling list or book, essentially describing the situation at hand and what your character wished for and how the outcome played out. Yes, you can read the whole thing, and it's just like reading a storyboard, and some of them are pretty interesting, and they do go in depth for what it is, but again, it just really feels unfinished, and it really feels out of place, being that other games at this time had full motion videos in order to show off their storylines and everything of that sort. So yeah, just going through the pain of a playthrough of this and getting just a text ending read just really feels like a slap in the face. I know I've heard from other people that they love the endings of TM1 and they don't mind the scrolling text, and for those people, I salute them and I respect them, because I am just not one of them. The other big issue is that the controls are just atrocious. Now, I'm not talking about the controls in the sense of the button inputs on the controller, even though I do wish these games gave you a little bit more leniency in terms of customizing the controls for everybody's tastes, but you are forced to play it a certain way, but that's okay. My main issue with the controls is how the cars feel. In this game, the ram damage is just insanely broken. Some vehicles literally can one-tap other vehicles just by touching them, and other vehicles can get stuck on other vehicles, causing them to die. Running into walls takes out half of your health. The list goes on. The controls in this game are just very floaty. You feel like you're driving boats, and you feel like you're on ice constantly, unless you're playing a character like Mr. Grimm or Spectre. Everybody else just, yeah, I'm just not a fan of how they feel in this game, and it's just not enjoyable to play. The other thing is it's super short. There's only like 6 levels in the entire tournament, so from start to finish, if you're really good at the game or playing on an easier difficulty, you can get through a full playthrough with one character in under 30 minutes. They're pretty short. So even though I do give this game credit for being the first of the series, and especially my favorite series of all time, I still have to put it at the bottom of the list just because it is by far the least picked one in my opinion when it comes to which one I want to play to have a good time in 2023. Moving on to number 7. This is again going to get me so much hate, but I'm being honest here, and this is my list, and for number 7, it's going to be Twisted Metal 2. If you're a part of the Discord, you know my hate for this game, and if you've seen my live streams or any of my videos, you've probably heard me talk smack on TM2. However, it is not my least favorite, and that is apparent here. However, it is pretty low on the list, and there's many reasons why. They brought over a lot of the jank from TM1 in terms of the controls. I still absolutely hate how most of the cars feel very floaty. You run into walls almost constantly, which causes damage to your vehicle, which can be frustrating. However, they just amped up the AI's difficulty to tenfold in TM2 over TM1. Don't get me wrong, TM1 was no walk in the park with the AI, but in TM2, they are just overly aggressive. It's mind-boggling how some of these things went past QA testing. Mr. Slam's constant freezes, Sweet Tooth's insane amount of special spam, and Axel's special spam on top of Axel's ram damage. It just feels broken. And of course, even Thumper's special is insanely broken in this game. There's so many things I could list off on a just go on for days basically, of things that feel unfinished, unfair, and unpredictable to the point of just straight frustration. In my opinion, it's fake difficulty. It's not a difficulty in the sense of, oh, it's progression like Dark Souls where rinse and repeat until you figure out the pattern and then you can beat it and feel triumphant. In this game, it's just straight up RNG and just good luck on doing well. Yes, you can play it for hours and hours and hours and get really used to the floaty controls and used to the level layout and know where everything is. You can get lives and all that and health pickups without much issue. But in my opinion, that only goes so far. There's still going to be frustrating elements and things that are out of your control, which I run into in every single playthrough. However, the main things that are bringing this a bump up TM1 for me are the level design. I absolutely love almost every level in this game except Moscow. Moscow can eat a dick. I absolutely hate that level. I hate playing through in the tournament, and I hate that it's a second level in the tournament. It's extremely difficult. There's not enough weapon pickups, not enough health pickups, and there's too many enemies at once just for a second level. It's absolutely stupid. Also, Holland is a little bit ridiculous. It's just a little bit too many enemies on just a flat plane. There's nothing else going on. So yeah, kind of a bummer there. But every other level, for that being said, is great. I love the design. I love the soundtrack in this game. It's legendary, absolutely amazing, and the roster of vehicles. This game introduced us to Twister, Axel, Mr. Slam, Shadow, you name it. There's so many amazing new characters in this game that right out the get-go have one of the best rosters in the entire series, and I will stand by that. And of course, the biggest difference to TM1 is you actually get full motion endings, which are comic book style, animated, full voice acted endings, and they are beautiful to look at even in 2023. Absolutely gorgeous and totally worth going through the pain, at least in my opinion. But again, coming back to this game is always a chore. I never really have a good time with it. It's more frustrating than it is rewarding. So in the end, this one is going to be put at the bottom of the list at number 7. Moving on to number 6, Twisted Metal 3. Yes, you heard me right. I like this game more than Twisted Metal 2 and 1 combined. I understand the critiques with this game, and that is why it's not at the top of my list. It's still towards the bottom, but I gotta say, I do have a more enjoyable experience going through a full playthrough of TM3 than I ever do with TM1 and 2. The biggest issues with TM3, of course, is the level design and the physics. The physics are annoying to the point where you roll over, you flip over like crazy, and especially if you're playing a Sweet Tooth or Hammerhead or really any vehicle that's top heavy, you can flip over constantly and it takes a few seconds to flip back over, basically leaving you as a sitting duck against the opponent. Same thing with freeze missiles. You can get frozen by the enemies, and in this game, the freezing is always a static amount of time until it goes away. It does not matter if you get hit, it doesn't matter if you take damage, it doesn't matter if you rapidly hit buttons, it just doesn't matter. You are a sitting duck a lot of the time in this game, and that is by far the most frustrating aspect. However, that's really where my issues stop. I don't mind the roster this time around. There's a couple stinkers in there, but for the most part, I like the new characters, and I like that they brought back a lot of returning favorites. Some of them aren't as powerful as they were in the past, or they're just not as good in terms of their design, and of course, their ending wish is pretty cheesy. And I get it, the endings are pretty bad. They really are bad. But they're to the point, in my opinion, where nowadays when I watch them, I laugh every single time because of their cheese factor. And I think that's what they were going for. Yes, they're insanely stupid, but at least they're enjoyable to some degree. Some of them are just straight up cringe, I will admit that, or just don't make sense at all, like Augers, who in the bio section, essentially is saying he wants to wish for the contest to end so he can fix up all the construction of the roads and stuff that he's built over the years in his job. But then when he wins, he actually just wishes to see his inner child, and which makes no sense. So that's just like one of a few examples of things that just don't make much sense with the endings to TM3. But that aside, gameplay wise, I still have a really good time with this one. I like the new addition to the weapons they added. I think the game looks great. I think this game looks a hell of a lot better in terms of its graphics compared to TM1 and 2. They also added Rob Zombie and other licensed tracks from like Pitch Shifter into the game's soundtrack, which I have to applaud them for, because that honestly was one of the first introductions to metal music that I really got into and I still listen to this day. And there are some great levels here. I love Hangar 18, I love Tokyo, and I love the Blimp level. Those are like three that just come to mind immediately whenever I do think of Twisted Metal, and I have to give TM3 a leg up for that. But yeah, everything else I said before does bring it down, and that's why it's at my number 6 spot. Moving on to number 5, we're at Twisted Metal 4. Yes, I do prefer Twisted Metal 4 over 3. I know there's a lot of people that think otherwise. I think 3 is better, and it just kind of goes back and forth. Or just people say they both suck and they forget them altogether. I think Twisted Metal 4 is heavily an underrated game in a lot of ways. I think the biggest positives I can say for TM4 is they fixed the physics from TM3, and out of the PlayStation 1 Twisted Metal titles, I can honestly say I think 4 has some of the best physics in the series. Twisted Metal 4, I think, has some great physics. It has a really decent sense of speed, and I really like the level design. I think they went really over the top with some of the levels, and they're a little bit too big for what they need to be, but the creativity was there, and I give them applause for that. You also have to remember, with TM3 and 4, they had extremely short dev cycles, so they really didn't have a whole lot of time to make these games perfect before launch. And the fact that this game even launched at all is honestly a miracle. Yes, there is some performance issues, especially with certain characters using their special weapons, where you will see the frame rate drop, even if you're using a high-end emulator to this day, which is kind of funny to see. I do like the new additions to the weapon set as well. The Auto Lob and the Merv missiles are really fun to use. Some of them are kind of stinkers though, like the Rain 2, so that's kind of a bummer. But for all in all, I do like the new futuristic aspect of this game, and I really did enjoy a lot of the new characters. I know a lot of people were upset coming into this game for the first time and not seeing many of their old favorites returning, and I can 100% understand that. But the way that they brought back a lot of the old favorites was through boss battles, and this was the main aspect of the game I actually don't like. Every single level, once you've defeated an enemy in the tournament, you get greeted with a boss battle for every single level. It just gets old, monotonous, and it gets to the point where they're not really bosses anymore. Yes, they are a stronger character than the ones you already fought in said level, but it just doesn't give you that fear of anxiety like you used to get with Minion coming out halfway through the tournament out of nowhere. And same with at the very end when you fought the big baddie like Minion in certain games or Dark Tooth or you name it. So when it comes to Twisted Metal 4, every boss just feels like an extra character you have to fight in the level until you reach Sweet Tooth at the very end, who is just insanely overpowered with his stupid special. So that was the biggest issue in TM4 in my opinion, and it would be higher on this list if it wasn't for having a boss at the end of every level to the point where the bosses don't really feel like boss battles anymore. And then Sweet Tooth just being so overly overpowered that it makes it a chore to go through a full tournament playthrough. However, there are a lot of exploits and little glitches and stuff that were left into the game that make it honestly a lot of fun to go through and learn and to figure out how to cheese these really shitty boss battles to make it a good time. And last but not least, this game also has a killer soundtrack, again featuring Rob Zombie, some new people like Cypress Hill, and 1 Minute Silence, just to name a couple that were also really big hitters at the time and are really underrated. So yeah, the soundtrack is amazing, and I just kind of wish they would have kept this soundtrack moving forward, but these are the only 2 games in the series that had licensed tracks like this, except for 2012, but we'll get to that one later. But yeah, TM4 has a special place in my heart, but I think it's a good spot at number 5 on my list. Moving on to number 4, this I think is also going to ruffle some feathers, but Twisted Metal Head On. And this again is including or / combining the PSP version and the PS2 / remaster version, the Extra Twisted Edition. The main reason I'm doing that is because there really isn't a whole lot of differences between the two, except for the PS2 just has better graphics, and they added an extra level, and of course the entire Lost section into the game from the Twisted Metal Harbor City that was sadly scrapped. Looking at Twisted Metal head on, it does take a lot of influences from Twisted Metal Black and Twisted Metal 2. It's kind of like a love child between the two. But I think that's also a detriment to it because it kind of feels like the entire time you're playing it, like it doesn't know what it wants to be. The biggest praise I can give Twisted Metal head on is both its gameplay is just top-notch stellar, it feels great, and it runs really well, and the endings are worth going through the full playthrough for every vehicle. I really love that they brought back that comic book design from TM2 and that sense of wacky humor to make every ending make sense, at least for the most part, and you have a good time viewing them. However, everything else is just kind of mid. Like, nothing's really terrible with head on. I can't really think off the top of my head anything that I actually dislike or hate. However, there are a lot of things that I do feel could have been better, and that's the reason why it's kind of on the mid tier of my list and not more near the top. The main reason is because I feel this game is by far the easiest in the entire series. Yes, there are some characters like ATV, which is a huge stinker and probably one of the worst characters in the game and in the entire series, let alone that, where you could make the game tougher for yourself by playing as them, and I agree with you. But for the most part, going through the game with all the regular characters is a kind of breeze, honestly, and it's fun. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad game because of this, but it is so easy that it becomes very boring very quickly. And to kind of add on to that, I think the level design is also very uninspired. It just feels very kind of mashed together and quickly put together, if that's the best way to describe it. But these levels feel very bland in a lot of ways. There's not a lot of creativity placed in there, and they're really just a lot of remakes from TM2. Obviously, there are some new ones like Greece and Transylvania and Russia, which really stick out, and they're really good maps for their own reasons, but it just comes down to, like, when you're playing the ones that feel like they're straight out of TM2, they literally feel like they're just a new age version of that exact map that we've already played in the past, and it just, for some reason, doesn't feel as good. I don't know if it's the engine they used or what, but something just doesn't feel as unique as the levels did in TM2 back in the day. Also, the color palette being very bright and colorful like TM2, it does work in some instances, but then other instances it just feels a little bit too, I don't know, too eye-poppy or just too much at times. I can't really put my finger on it, but a good example is like when you're playing a game like Twisted Metal Black, yes, it can get really boring seeing a lot of blacks and grays all the time in the color palette, but when you use weapons like a missile, like a homing missile for instance, seeing that really bright, vivid purple color kind of soar through the air before it explodes into a firework onto your enemy really adds to the atmosphere and makes it feel like a realistic world. And I know they're not going for a realistic world here with Head On, but that colorful, bright color palette honestly takes away from a lot of that in terms of the spectacle of the different weapons and abilities. So just something I wanted to put out there. And same with like the fire effects are kind of mid, kind of glitchy as well in the PS2 version. I don't know why. And when it comes to the soundtrack, I'm also not a huge fan. Like, it's okay, but a lot of it just feels like background music, which is kind of a bummer because I feel like Twisted Metal, even when it had the original soundtracks, they always were bangers. Like on TM1, TM2, you name it, they were banger soundtracks. So coming to Head On, it really feels like a step back when it comes to the soundtrack. And the last thing I was really not a fan of with Head On was the power-ups and the mini-games during the tournament mode. So when it comes to the minigames and the power-ups, I understand they are technically optional. You don't have to choose or pick them up, and you don't have to do the minigames. That is totally a fair critique. But I will say that when it comes to the minigames, you do unlock characters and levels and stuff like that while playing them, so in a way they are kind of needed. And the minigames can be so frustratingly stupid that it just takes away from the overall experience, and sometimes it takes you so long to finish a minigame, you kind of forget what game you're even playing, and you're just getting frustrated. And I just wish they were never there in the first place. And then when it comes to the power-ups, what I mean is every single time you kill an enemy, not just finishing the level, but when you kill an enemy, one power-up will appear above their dead body that you can pick up, and it gives you some pretty amazing upgrades. So some of them are like an upgrade to your jump, so you can go way higher. Some of them are an upgrade to your machine guns, which are absolutely broken. It literally gives you mega guns from TM Black, but for the entire game, they never run out. And then some of them are armor upgrades to make your car stronger, health upgrades, you name it. And even a special weapon upgrade, which I think is the only one they should have given, in my opinion. The special weapon upgrade is fine because it adds a second layer to everyone's special weapon to make them twice as strong, or completely change up how you use it in general. And I think that's really a unique aspect to the game, and I like that. But every other power-up to me just feels way overpowered, and by the time you're on like the 4th or 5th level, if you haven't died yet, and by the way, if you do die, you do lose all your power-ups, even if you haven't lost all your lives. So at least they thought of that. But again, if you're pretty decent at the game, and you get to like the 4th or 5th level in the tournament, by that time, you are essentially a boss battle. Like, you are the person that comes into the room, and then the enemies hear boss music. It's insane how overpowered you become, and it makes the game just a walk in the park, even if you're playing on hard. So it's just kind of a bummer that the main game, the main tournament, really just holds your hand the entire time with these power-ups, and I just wish there was an option to turn them off in general. Yes, you can completely ignore them and not grab them at all, but then you get to a point where the developers kind of assumed you should be getting these upgrades by the time you're at the final battle, and the last 2 boss battles become, honestly, kind of impossible if you don't get any of the power-ups throughout the entire tournament. I'm not saying it is impossible, but if you're playing on hard, it is probably one of the most frustrating boss battles of all time, going against Tower Tooth and then Dark Tooth, or whatever way it is. I can't remember which way it goes first. But you have to fight both of them essentially at the same time, and doing that without any upgrades on hard is pretty difficult. So yeah, it just comes down to, it's a mid game in my opinion, and that's why it's perfectly smack dab middle of my list. Moving on to number 3, Twisted Metal 2012, aka Twisted Metal on PS3. This one might be kind of surprising, especially if you guys have seen my recent video where I talked about why Twisted Metal 2012 failed or flopped. And sadly, it is the truth. I just wanted to speak that out, that I love this game for a lot of reasons, but I also understand there's a lot of reasons why it didn't do too well and it didn't sell very well. The main reason is when this game was originally created, of course, it was meant to be a multiplayer only game. I think all of you know that. And then kind of towards the end of the dev cycle, Sony came back to them, said, here's some more money, make it a full-fledged AAA title with a single player included. And so the single player in the end felt very rushed, and it honestly feels like it was an afterthought. Clearly there is a lot of creativity that went into the single player when it comes to the boss battles and the level design, but the level design really only comes into play when you're going against 16 players in an online match. When you're going against only 10 characters or less in the single player, the levels are just way too long, way too large, and it just becomes a ghost town half the time. The other issue too is, like I stated, the boss battles are just insanely drawn out. They're more tedious than they are frustrating, but if you play on harder difficulties, including Twisted, it's just artificial difficulty that just makes it so frustrating that you just want to throw a controller at the TV. And the fact that that was by design is what really makes me like, why? Like, why'd they do that? But that aside, I think 2012 honestly has the best gameplay in the entire series. The sense of speed is perfect. The cars handle really great. The physics are kind of wishy-washy. I understand that some people hate the physics, some people love them. I'm on the fence. I don't really necessarily love the physics because they can be kind of glitchy at times. But the way the cars handle is the perfect embodiment of what Twisted Metal is, in my opinion. Also, the level design I think is amazing for online play. If you can get into an online match, especially in 2023, using like X-Link or something with some buddies, you can have a wonderful time with 2012. It's a great game and a great experience that I think everybody who's a fan of Twisted Metal should experience. It's just such a shame that the single player is just so much worse because of how rushed it feels. And not only just talking about the boss battles bringing down the single player experience, they lost the essence of what Twisted Metal was in the sense of going through the game with every character, enjoying each character for their own story and their own wish, but instead they ripped that away and they only gave us 3 characters that they combine into one story mode. So even though they technically have 3 different stories with 3 different wishes, they mushed it all together into one playthrough, which is about 5 to 5.5 hours long at max, and it just feels very incomplete. It doesn't feel nearly as big and grand as a regular Twisted Metal tournament, where you can go through with each character and kind of choose and pick your favorite. Also, having Sweet Tooth in the body of Axel's vehicle just feels like a cardinal sin. I don't know why they thought that was an idea that should ever happen. So yeah, that's why this game isn't higher on my list, but I think it does deserve its 3rd place because of how amazing the gameplay feels and how awesome the online is when it does work and when the servers were still alive. Also, little quick note at the end, the game looks amazing. I forgot to say that. The graphics I think are really, really good. And I know I'm kind of biased, but I do think it is one of the better looking games on PS3 when you're just in the chaos going against like 15 players, missiles going everywhere, and the fact that the system doesn't really chug along too badly with the frame rate is pretty impressive for the time. And coming down to the wire, number 2. I know this one is going to surprise literally probably everybody in this comment section and anybody watching, especially if you're a fan of the channel. Number 2 is Twisted Metal Black. That's right, it's not my favorite, but we're gonna get there. Twisted Metal Black used to be my number 1 game that I always would choose, hands down. As soon as I thought of Twisted Metal, I thought of Twisted Metal Black. And don't get me wrong, I still think that is the case for most of the time. The only reason this is not my number 1 anymore is because coming back to these games after all these years, making so much content on them and doing full playthroughs and all that stuff, I've really come to understand the ins and outs of every game and how they feel and how they play, and looking at it as a more analytical sense than when I was just a kid playing a game that looked cool and felt cool. So with Twisted Metal Black, I still absolutely love the world of TM Black. I love the atmosphere. I love the horror aspect and the storylines. Every single story and little movie in this game really adds to the overall narrative. I love that it all takes place in Sweet Tooth's head, and that's the canon of the game. And I love just how dark and gritty it is. I don't think that'll ever change. And I kind of hope that they go back to this aspect at some point in time with the new TM game, but if they don't, oh well, at least we still have Black. The other thing too is before 2012 came out, Black, in my opinion, and I still stand by this, I think has some of the best gameplay in the series. I love how fast the cars accelerate and drift around corners, and you can stop on a dime, you can jump pretty high without losing any health if you fall off a building and hit the ground or run into a wall, and the physics just makes sense. I have heard arguments of people saying the opposite, that they don't like the physics, they don't like how fast the cars accelerate, all that good stuff. But honestly, I think it's just they haven't played the game enough. I really honestly can say that. I know that people can come at me and say, well, you don't like TM2 because you haven't played it enough. I can tell you straight up, TM2 was one of the first TMs in the series that I got. TM1 was the very first one in the series that I ever got. Those two, I probably in my life put more hours into than any other ones in the series before I picked up the other ones. And I can honestly say those are still at the bottom of my list. But when it comes to Twisted Metal Black, if you don't like the physics or you don't like the sense of speed, it could just be the way that you play. And that's totally understandable and that's totally fair. But I will say that I think the sense of speed is perfect, if not a little bit slow, because 2012 is actually a little bit faster in a lot of ways. But that being said, the gameplay is still top-notch. It still holds up to this day. I think the difficulty from the AI also is just fine if you're playing it on medium or normal. I think if you go to hard, it just becomes so aggressive with the AI that it gets to the point where it's just frustrating. And not only that, but the health just absolutely does nothing. Health pickups give you a sliver of health even on normal, and then on hard they give you even less, which is just insane. So yes, frustrating and unfair if you play in a hard mode, but if you're playing in a normal, I think it is definitely fair and in my opinion pretty well balanced. I don't really have any issues going through a full playthrough with any vehicle in the game, except Brimstone is kind of a drag because the special just doesn't do enough damage. But otherwise, I think every car for the most part is pretty balanced, and it is one of the more balanced games in the entire series. On top of that, I think the level design is okay. I don't think there's any level that's amazing or my favorite in the entire series when it comes to level design from every other game. But when you're looking at Twisted Metal Black, there are a couple that stand out in my opinion. I think Snowy Roads is an absolutely gorgeous level. I love how strictly different it feels than the rest of the game because of that white aesthetic of the snow. And of course, you get that brooding atmosphere of the music. It fits really well, and it just really sticks out to me as one of the most just breathtaking maps in the entire series. And of course, Suburbs really sticks out as just one of the biggest maps to ever show up in a Twisted Metal game up until that point. And I know a lot of people complain it's too big. I think it's just right. I think with the sense of speed of the game and how many people you go against on that level, I don't really have an issue with Suburbs, honestly. The only level that I can complain about, or the two that I can complain about really, are Drive-In Movie, which is way too small with not enough health pickups, which just becomes way too frustrating, and Prison Passage. I understand that on a technical level, Prison Passage is extremely impressive. It's really cool. You start out in a small arena versus 2 characters. It opens up to a larger ship that you can drive around and fight more people, and then it docks actually with a moving background and everything into the Prison Passage, thus opening up a gigantic level where you fight a ton of enemies at once. It's a cool idea. but in execution it's more frustrating than anything, and it's by far the #1 level I dread the most in every playthrough. So that's why after coming back to this game over all these years, the level design, the brooding atmosphere slash just color palette really does get old after one playthrough. And that's why it does knock a couple points down for me, even though I love the overall story arc of the game. I love the characters. I love the roster. I love the gameplay. It's those elements that do drag it down a little bit. And the last but not least is the boss battles. I think Minion is okay, but the shield system is super stupid. Once you figure it out and understand how to defeat him, it's still frustrating because there's a lot of RNG involved in destroying his shield by hitting him on all sides. And then Warhawk. I understand they want to bring helicopters into Twisted Metal. I don't know why they keep doing this. I think in 2012, that was something I actually missed talking about, is the flying vehicles were a huge hindrance to the gameplay. Absolutely hate them. They shouldn't be in Twisted Metal, in my opinion. And when it comes to Warhawk as a boss in 2012, I think he is one of the worst bosses in the entire series, bar none. He's frustrating for new players. He is boring to go against once you've learned how to defeat him. And he's so easily cheesable that you can defeat him in like under 2 minutes. He's a really fast and easy boss battle if you've played the game enough to understand how to defeat him with a cheese tactic. But even without the cheese, it's still just a really boring and bland final boss. I really wish they would have brought back Darktooth or something like that, or just a whole new boss that didn't involve a flying vehicle, because most of the characters in this game, you can't even hit him with your special weapon unless you cheese it out. So yeah, Warhawk was just really horribly designed. Not a fan of that boss at all. And that's why I have to bump Twisted Metal Black down from my pedestal of my favorite game in the series to #2. So now you're sitting there probably asking yourself, what game has he not talked about? What could be #1? What is Nick's #1 game in the entire Twisted Metal series? And I can tell you straight up, without even hesitation, my absolute favorite game in the entire Twisted Metal series is Twisted Metal Small Brawl. And now I know, a lot of you are probably laughing. You're like, wow, this guy's a fucking idiot. Why am I watching this video that's over 20 minutes long now? Why am I sitting here and listening to this guy who thinks a game for children is the best game in the entire series? This guy's obviously a child and he's never played any other games. I'm going to stop you right there. First of all, Small Brawl, yes, the aesthetic obviously leans more towards children, but I can assure you this game is amazing for all ages. Does not matter if you're a kid or an adult. This game has some of the best gameplay, best level design, best soundtrack, and in my opinion, some of the best endings in the entire game. There's only 2 things in this entire game that I can look at as negatives, and they're not really that bad either. The first is Gridiron Gore, which is this 3rd to last level in the tournament. It's just kind of bland. It's not terrible, but it's a lot like watching DC in TM3. There's just not a lot going on. It's just a big open field that takes forever to find weapons, and you have a guy in a lawnmower driving around running you over. So without the lawnmower, it would have definitely been way worse, but it's still kind of a mid-level. And the second point that I want to make that is kind of a downer is the final boss. I like the idea of Piecemeal in the sense that he's created from all of the fallen pieces of the people you've destroyed in the tournament, and he can use anybody special in the entire game. But the way it was designed, where he comes and goes throughout the battle while you're also fighting 5 other enemies, where you defeat an enemy and then he pops out, you fight him for a little bit, as soon as a chunk of health is gone, he disappears, and then the enemies come back, you kill another one, he comes out, and it's rinse and repeat. No matter how good you are at the game, it's always a tedious fight, and it usually takes about 30 to 40 minutes minimum. It's a very tedious and frustrating fight because of this. Is it difficult? Not really. It's only difficult if you play on hard, because he is a huge bullet sponge and takes 3 times as much damage in order to be defeated. Same with Trapper, but I think Trapper's a much better boss battle on a much better level, because that's the other issue with Piecemeal, is the level it's on isn't that great either. I like the aesthetic of being in a movie theater, but that's pretty much all there is that's good about it. It's a pretty bland, slanted level with not much on it, and there's not enough weapon pickups is like my 2 biggest gripes with the map. But all in all, those are the only gripes I have with Small Brawl. Everything else I think is honestly some of the best you can get in the entire series, and I really just want to praise it for what it is. more people need to give this game a try. Whether you want to go out and buy a copy for yourself on eBay for really cheap, or if you can go and find an emulator for it online, just please give this game a shot and give it a try. I honestly can tell you, you will love it. Gameplay wise, it's kind of a mixture of TM2 and maybe TM Head-On in a way, because if you didn't know, this game actually came out after Twisted Metal Black. So they took a lot of nuances and stuff they learned from that game and they brought it to the PlayStation 1 system. There's a whole interesting history behind this game's development. If you want to see my interview with the game's lead developer, David Goodrich, I have an interview on my channel. He also has his own YouTube channel called Goodrich Games if you want to go give him a follow. He would highly recommend it, and he's an amazing content creator and a lot of fun to listen to. And yeah, there's a lot of history behind this, but without getting into any of that, they learned a lot from the original few games on PS1, and they saw the success in what people loved in Twisted Metal Black, and they were able to kind of mix it together into Small Brawl's gameplay. So it's got the sense of speed of TM2, where it's not super fast like Black or as frustrating, but it brought in a lot of the skill gaps for someone who's brand new to the game can still jump in and have a good time versus someone who's a veteran can learn certain techniques with different characters to have a really interesting time and master the techniques, as well as they brought level designs from both TM2 and Twisted Metal Black, I think, into this game in the sense of having a lot of environmental damage and a lot of environmental things you can mess with the game throughout it to make it a really good time, and the creativity is just ever flowing through every level. I mean, you go into the kitchen level and you're literally driving on countertops. You can go into a microwave and get essentially cooked alive, thrown out of it. You can throw a napalm into a plumber's asshole and blow a hole into a wall, opening a whole other section to the level and unlocking a character. And that's just one example of one level. There's so many other examples and different things that are cool, little Easter eggs you can find throughout your tournament. And the AI is actually pretty intelligent in this game as well. They don't feel stupid, and they don't feel overly aggressive either like we were used to in the past games. They actually do fight each other when you're not around, and they don't have infinite special spam like in every other game. According to the lead designer himself, he has stated that the AI actually go by the same rules the player does. They can only shoot weapons that they pick up on the battlefield, so you also have to worry about them going and stealing your weapons because they can use them against you. So I always thought that was a really cool aspect of the game, that the AI feels legit, it feels realistic, and playing the game a lot, you really do feel that. It feels like an actual tournament where you're not just the only one they're all going after. And I think for a PS1 game, especially upscaling it on DuckStation, this game still looks really good in 2023. It's probably one of the better looking games on the PS1 next to TM3 and 4. It has its own visual style, I will say that. So some people might look at it and be like, it's kind of ugly compared to TM4, but they're just different types of art styles. But I will say it's definitely better looking than TM2 and TM1 combined, at least in my opinion. And with that, mixed with the level design, for the most part, being really insanely good and having some of my favorite levels in the entire series, having an amazing roster of characters, bringing back a ton of classic ones from TM2 and even TM1, which was awesome to see Crimson Fury making a return, and they added some new characters to boot that were actually pretty decent. I gotta give Small Brawl my #1 spot. It's become one of my favorite games of all time, and I just love it every single time I come back to it. It's never frustrating, it's never a bad experience, and it's always fun. And that's all I can ask for when I play a video game is, am I having fun? And yeah, TM Small Brawl is by far the most fun game in the series. Now, I know I didn't go into every single point that I would love to make in every single one of these games. This video would have been well over an hour long if I did, and my voice would not be able to take that. So, that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed my ranking of every Twisted Metal in the series from worst to best. And if you didn't enjoy it, or you just think I'm completely wrong, that is totally fine. Once again, let me know your ranking in the comment section below. I would love to hear your thoughts on each game if you can. And what did you think about the video? If you'd like to see more stuff like this, or I don't know, maybe if you want me to do a full review for each game separately, maybe that might be on my radar as well. So with that, leave a like to show your support as always, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and we'll hopefully see you in the next one. Peace out. Thank you guys so much for making it to the end of the video. Before we head out, I want to give a huge special thank you to our channel members. These are amazing people who are wanting to support the channel and the content here. And if you want to do the same, you can click the little join button underneath every single new upload. And in becoming a channel member not only supports me and the channel, but also gives you a ton of perks in doing so, including early access to new content and being a part of exclusive polls and information that other people would not be able to access. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you again so much for the love and support, and we'll hopefully see you in the next one. Peace out.